On my graduation day, not one family member showed up. They all went to my brother's soccer game instead. But as I walked off the stage with my diploma, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad, "Come home right now." Then 37 missed calls followed. You know, there are moments in life that just break you, moments where the deepest hopes you carry are shattered so profoundly they change you forever. For me, that moment was my college graduation, a day that should have been a celebration, but instead became a painful, undeniable proof that my own family saw me as nothing more than a footnote in their golden child's story. And that day, that was the moment everything snapped, the moment I decided they would regret every single moment they dismissed me. I'm Adrian, and I just turned 22 that summer. I'd spent years, quietly grinding through endless papers, late-night study sessions, and part-time jobs just to make sure I could afford to live on my own and get that degree. On the morning of my graduation, I woke up with this strange mix of nerves and a tiny spark of pride buzzing in my chest. I remember standing in front of the mirror, fumbling with the tassel on my black cap and gown, my hands shaking a little. For the first time in forever, I felt like I was on the cusp of being seen. Like maybe, just maybe, my family would look at me with something other than that familiar disappointment or total indifference. But here's the thing, my family never really cared about me in the way you'd expect. My younger brother, Caleb, he was the golden child. He was 18, still in high school, and in my parents' eyes, a bona fide soccer prodigy. Every single weekend, our entire lives revolved around his games, his tournaments, his practices. My dad would pace the sidelines like he was coaching the World Cup. My mom would bring trays of snacks for the whole team. Even our extended relatives would sometimes show up just to watch him kick a ball. My achievements, my honor roll, my internships, my scholarships, they were all just polite nods, quickly followed by a pivot back to Caleb's latest goal or amazing assist. It was exhausting. That morning, as I scrolled through our family group chat, I expected at least one excited message about my day. Instead, I found a flood of texts, all about Caleb's biggest game of the season, happening at the exact same time as my graduation. "We can't miss this one," my mom had written. My dad added, "It's his future, Adrian. You'll understand." Not a single word. Not one. About my ceremony. I stared at those messages until the screen blurred, a knot tightening in my stomach. I wanted to reply, to remind them that I had been working for 4 brutal years to earn that diploma, that today was the culmination of every sacrifice. But I didn't. I just slipped my phone into my pocket, clinging to this ridiculous hope that maybe they were just being quiet because they planned a surprise. The auditorium was absolutely buzzing when I arrived. Rows of proud families waved and snapped photos, cheering for their graduates. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding, looking for my mom's face, or my dad with his phone raised, recording. But the seats where I'd pictured them sitting were filled with strangers, all clapping for their kids. My friends instantly spotted their parents, who were cheering and holding flowers. My chest felt so tight, but I forced a smile, telling myself, they're just running late. They'll be here. As the ceremony began, the crushing reality started to sink in. When my name was called and I walked across that stage, the applause felt hollow, like it was meant for someone else. I gripped that diploma, forcing myself to stand tall, even as my stomach sank with each step. Cameras flashed, but none of them were for me. I glanced at the crowd one last time, and the truth hit me like a physical punch. They hadn't come. They had chosen Caleb's game over my graduation. When the ceremony ended, the other graduates ran into the arms of their families, bouquets of flowers being passed around, parents crying and hugging their kids. I stood there, right in the middle of all that joyous chaos, holding a diploma case in one hand and my cap in the other, trying desperately to keep the burning in my chest from showing on my face. I just told myself to leave before the loneliness swallowed me whole. So, I started walking toward the parking lot. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad, "Come home right now." Before I could even process it, my phone lit up again, 37 missed calls. My fingers trembled as I stared at the screen, torn between pure anger and utter confusion. What could they possibly want from me now, of all times, when they couldn't even show up for me? And that, my friends, is where things truly began to spiral. I slid into the driver's seat of my old Honda, my diploma still on my lap, staring at those 37 missed calls. My stomach was twisted in knots. A part of me, the angry, hurt part, wanted to throw the phone into the passenger seat and just drive away, never looking back. But another part of me, the part that had grown up always bending, always trying to earn a scrap of approval, pressed the callback button. My dad answered instantly, his voice sharp, impatient, like I was the one inconveniencing him. "Adrian, where are you? Get home right now. This is serious. No congratulations. No, we're proud of you." Not even a basic acknowledgement that I had just graduated. His tone was the same he used when telling me to pick up groceries or mow the lawn. My throat went dry. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Don't argue with me. Just come home. Caleb needs you." Those words made me pause, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. Caleb needs you. It was always Caleb. I was 22 years old. I had just closed a massive chapter of my life. And yet, the very first thing my dad said was that my younger brother needed me. My mind raced, filling with old memories, staying up late to help Caleb with school projects he'd left until the last minute, being guilt-tripped into giving him rides across town while I was studying, loaning him money I never saw again because he's just a kid. Always Caleb. Always me cleaning up his messes. I swallowed my pride, the bitterness thick in my mouth, and asked, "Did something happen at the game?" Silence for a beat. Then he just said, "Just get here. You'll see." And he hung up. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Every rational part of me screamed to ignore him, to celebrate my graduation on my own terms. But that old reflex, years of being conditioned to respond whenever they snapped their fingers, drove me back to that house. The entire ride, I kept imagining what awaited me. Maybe Caleb got hurt. Maybe there was some genuine emergency. That was the only explanation I could stomach for why they hadn't come to my ceremony. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the cars lined up outside, my parents' SUV, my aunt and uncle's minivan, even my grandparents' old sedan. For a fleeting moment, my heart lifted. Had they planned a surprise party after all? Maybe all those calls were part of some twisted attempt to get me home so they could cheer and finally recognize me. I stepped inside, diploma still in hand, bracing for balloons or streamers. Instead, I was hit with the smell of takeout pizza and the sound of laughter coming from the living room. The TV was blasting a replay of Caleb's soccer game. There he was on the screen, making a goal, and my entire family was crowded around, cheering as if it were happening live. Nobody turned when I walked in. Nobody noticed the gown draped around my shoulders. It was like I was invisible. Finally, my mom glanced up, her expression flat, almost annoyed. "Oh, good. You're here. We need you to drive Caleb to his friend's house later. He's celebrating with the team." I stood there frozen, the words barely registering. "Are you serious?" I finally managed, my voice trembling. My dad shot me a look, his face already tightening. "Don't take that tone. Your brother just had the game of his life. We're all proud of him." He gestured to the TV where Caleb was being interviewed by some local news reporter. This could open doors for scholarships, maybe even professional opportunities. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, the anger bubbling, scalding hot, inside me. They were watching a recorded game like it was the Super Bowl, while I had just walked across a stage alone. No applause from them, no cheers, nothing. Just then, Caleb walked in from the kitchen, holding a slice of pizza, grinning ear to ear. "Adrian, did you see my goal? Dad said scouts might be watching." He was beaming, his eyes full of pure, unadulterated excitement. And yet, not a single word about my graduation. I clenched my diploma tighter. I graduated today. The room went quiet for a split second, then my grandmother chuckled softly, like she was brushing off an annoying fly. "That's nice, dear, but this game, oh, Caleb, you were just amazing." I felt something inside me crack. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was humiliation. I had imagined this day 1,000 times. Thought maybe it would be different. Instead, I was standing in a room full of people who couldn't even pretend to care. My mom frowned at me like I was being difficult. "You're always making things about you. Can't you just be happy for your brother for once?" Happy for him? I had spent years swallowing my pride, stepping aside, letting him shine while I worked in the shadows. But this was supposed to be my moment, just one. And they had taken even that. I didn't say another word. I walked past them, up the stairs to my old room, and shut the door behind me with a quiet click. I sat on the bed, staring at the diploma in my hands, the weight of it heavier than I expected. I should have been proud, should have been smiling. Instead, all I felt was a gnawing sense of betrayal. As I sat there, I heard the laughter downstairs, Caleb's name being shouted over and over like a chant. It hit me then that this wasn't just about today. This was the story of my entire life with them. And for the first time, instead of swallowing it, instead of accepting it, I started thinking maybe I didn't need to play their game anymore. I sat upstairs in my old room for a long, long time. The diploma balanced across my knees, listening to the muffled cheers and laughter coming from downstairs. Every few minutes, Caleb's name would echo through the walls. Another round of applause at the replay of his game. Another laugh about some moment I couldn't care less about. My chest ached, not just from the rejection, but from this growing, horrifying realization that I'd been fooling myself for years. I had always told myself if I just worked harder, achieved more, kept my head down, they'd notice. But no matter what I did, Caleb would always, always come first. I stared at the diploma. It should have felt like victory, like freedom. Instead, it felt like proof of just how invisible I was to them. I kept hearing my mom's voice in my head, "You're always making things about you." Was I? Or had I finally just asked for something so basic, so human, acknowledgement, and even that was too much for them to give? I was about to shove the diploma into my backpack when there was a knock on the door. Caleb's voice. "Hey, can I come in?" I didn't answer right away, but he pushed the door open anyway, grinning like he had just won the lottery. He tossed his half-eaten pizza crust into my trash can and plopped down on my desk chair, spinning it around to face me. "Man, Dad said scouts might actually call. Can you imagine me playing college ball? Maybe even pro." His eyes were glowing with a self-assured brilliance. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. After a few moments of awkward silence, he finally noticed the diploma in my hands. His grin faltered for half a second before he leaned back in the chair, smirking. "So, you finally got your paper, huh? That's cool, I guess. But honestly, I don't know why you're so dramatic about it. It's not like anyone's going to hire you just because you have some piece of paper." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. He wasn't just parroting arrogance. He was repeating what he had heard our parents say about me for years. To them, my education was a waste of time compared to his real talent. I managed to keep my voice calm. This took me 4 years. For years of working, studying, not relying on anyone. You could at least pretend it matters. He shrugged, leaning forward to grab one of the pens from my desk and twirl it in his fingers. "I mean, it's fine, but come on, Adrian. Today was about me. Everyone came because they know I have a future. You'll get your chance someday, maybe." That was the final crack. The casual dismissal, the smug certainty that his game was worth more than 4 years of my life. But it wasn't just his words. It was the fact that he believed them because everyone downstairs had fed him that narrative his whole life. He was the golden boy, and I was just the other son. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing some big secret. "Oh, by the way, I used your laptop earlier. Hope that's cool. I needed to send highlights of my game to the coach, and your computer's faster than mine. I emailed them from your account. It looks more professional coming from a college graduate, right?" He laughed like it was a harmless joke. My blood ran cold. "You what?" "Relax," he said, rolling his eyes. "I just attached the video and wrote a little intro. Nothing crazy. Coaches like seeing stuff from reliable people. And come on, you're the reliable one. Everyone knows that. They'll take me more seriously if it looks like I've got people backing me up." I stood up so fast he stopped spinning in the chair. "Caleb, you had no right." Before I could finish, the door opened again. My dad stepped in, arms crossed, his expression already irritated. "What's going on in here?" "He's overreacting," Caleb said immediately, smirking at me like he knew he'd already won. "I just sent my highlight reel from his email." "Big deal." My dad's eyes landed on me, sharp and disappointed. "Adrian, stop making this about you. Your brother's future is at stake. If helping him means using your computer, then that's what you'll do. Don't be selfish." Selfish? The word rang in my ears louder than anything else. I had spent years sacrificing my time, my money, my energy for this family. And now, after they abandoned me on my graduation day, after Caleb hijacked even my small piece of pride, I was being called selfish for daring to object. My voice cracked, but I forced it out. "Do you even realize what today was for me? Do you know what it felt like to walk across that stage alone, with no one cheering for me, while you were all watching him kick a ball?" My dad's face hardened. "Don't talk about your brother's accomplishments like that. We're proud of him. You'll get your turn someday if you stop sulking." And then he did something that sealed it. He stepped over, took the diploma from my hands, and looked at it for barely a second before setting it on my desk, face down, like it was nothing more than a piece of junk mail. "This is just paper, Adrian. What matters is what you do with it. Your brother's out there doing something that could actually change his life." Something inside me snapped. The diploma wasn't just paper. It was years of nights spent studying until my eyes burned. Of missing out on parties, of scraping together rent money. And to him, it meant nothing. To all of them, it meant nothing. I felt a heat in my chest, a sharp clarity that I hadn't felt before. That was the moment I realized there was no fixing this, no hoping for recognition. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was betrayal. They had taken the most important day of my life and crushed it under their obsession with Caleb. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream, didn't argue. I just looked at them, my smug brother and my dismissive father, and knew something had fundamentally changed. And while they went back downstairs, laughing, planning Caleb's future, I sat in silence, staring at my diploma on the desk. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to win their approval. I was thinking about how to make them regret ever underestimating me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bed, staring up at the ceiling while the glow from the streetlights cut sharp lines across the walls. Every laugh, every cheer drifting up from downstairs replayed in my head until it felt like they were mocking me. My diploma sat on the desk, turned upside down, just as my dad had left it. I hadn't picked it up again. I couldn't bring myself to. For years, I told myself their indifference was just a misunderstanding. That maybe if I did better, tried harder, they'd see me. But the moment my dad set my diploma face down, as if it were worthless, it all became clear. They weren't blind to what I'd done. They just didn't care. My achievements didn't fit their narrative. Caleb was the star, and I was the extra. The next morning, I came downstairs in plain clothes, no gown, no cap. My mom was frying eggs, humming cheerfully. My dad had the newspaper open, and Caleb was scrolling through his phone with the same smug grin he'd worn since the game. I sat quietly, waiting for someone to say something about yesterday. Anything. But no one did. Instead, my mom glanced at me and said, "You'll take Caleb to practice later, right? He has a big tournament coming up, and we don't want him worrying about buses." I let out a hollow laugh before I could stop myself. "Of course. Because nothing else I do matters, right?" My dad lowered his paper, his eyes narrowing. "Adrian, don't start. You're 22. It's time you grew up. Your brother has a future, and he needs our support. You should be proud to help him." I wanted to scream, to shout that I had a future, too. That I had just graduated. That I had built something for myself without anyone's help. But the words stuck in my throat. What was the point? They'd just twist it. Call me selfish again. So, I said nothing. Caleb smirked across the table, his voice oozing self-satisfaction. "Don't worry, Dad. Adrian likes being the responsible one. He'll drive me." I stared down at my plate, appetite gone, hands clenched in my lap. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just hurt. I was trapped. They weren't going to let me celebrate my own success, and they weren't going to give me space to breathe. They were going to keep using me until I broke. The following days blurred together. I went through the motions, driving Caleb to practices, running errands my parents asked for, all while they carried on like nothing had happened. Whenever I walked into a room, they were laughing about Caleb's game, rewatching highlights, or speculating about his future career. If I tried to talk about job hunting, interviews, or the degree I'd worked so hard for, the conversation died instantly or was redirected back to him. The silence was suffocating. At night, I lay awake, replaying the graduation ceremony in my head, the empty stands where my family should have been. The hollow echo of my name as I crossed the stage alone. It gnawed at me. Not just the absence, but the knowledge that they had chosen to be absent. They hadn't forgotten. They had made a deliberate choice. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My dad's voice was low, but firm. "We'll need to save for Caleb's trips if the scouts show interest. Adrian can help cover gas until he finds a real job. It's the least he can do." The least I can do, I pressed my back against the wall outside the kitchen, my hands trembling. I had worked my way through college without their help. I had taken out loans, picked up shifts wherever I could, lived frugally so I wouldn't have to ask them for anything. And now they wanted me to bankroll Caleb's future. That was rock bottom for me. Not just being ignored, but being expected to sacrifice even more as if my own dreams didn't exist. I felt hollowed out, a shell of myself, moving quietly through a house where my existence barely registered unless it served someone else. But in that silence, something began to shift. I stopped talking at the dinner table. I stopped trying to share updates about my job search. I stopped waiting for them to notice me. Instead, I started taking long drives by myself after dropping Caleb off, using the time to think, to plan. I began keeping notes in a small journal hidden in my backpack. Ideas about what I wanted to do, how I could get out, and maybe, just maybe, how I could make them feel what I was feeling. Each page I filled with quiet, burning determination. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was done playing their game. They had made their choice. And now, slowly, carefully, I was going to make mine. I don't think my family even noticed when I started pulling away. In fact, that's what made it so easy. Their eyes were always on Caleb, his practices, his tournaments, his endless highlight reels. My absence at the dinner table, my silence in conversations, the way I slipped out of the house for hours at a time, it barely registered. And in that space, in that quiet, I started to breathe again. The first thing I did was move my diploma out of the house. I couldn't stand seeing it face down on my desk, forgotten and dismissed. One Saturday, while everyone was at Caleb's game, I packed it carefully into my bag and drove to my small apartment near campus. I had been keeping it as a backup during school, but now, for the first time, it felt like a sanctuary. When I hung the diploma on the wall above my desk, it looked different. Not just paper, not just another achievement they'd brushed aside. It was mine, proof of what I'd done despite them. In the following weeks, I poured myself into job applications. At first, I felt discouraged. Every listing asked for experience I didn't have, or for companies I thought wouldn't give me a chance. But then one morning, my phone buzzed with an email from a mid-sized firm downtown. They wanted an interview. I remember sitting there staring at the screen, heart pounding. It wasn't just an interview. It was the first spark of possibility. The thought that maybe, outside the suffocating bubble of my family's house, someone might actually see me for who I was. I prepared like my life depended on it. I stayed up late, practicing answers, ironing my one decent suit, rehearsing in front of the mirror. The morning of the interview, I drove downtown, the city's skyline sharp against the blue sky, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The firm's office was sleek, modern, filled with the low hum of productivity. When I sat across from the hiring manager, I told my story, not about being overshadowed or dismissed, but about working through college, juggling jobs and classes, learning discipline and persistence. 2 days later, they called. I got the job. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't 6 figures, but it was solid, a real start. I sat in my apartment after hanging up the phone, grinning like an idiot, the weight on my chest lifting just a little. Back at home, though, my family barely noticed the change. When I told them, My mom smiled faintly, as if humoring me, and said, "That's nice, Adrian, but don't let it interfere with helping your brother." My dad didn't even look up from his laptop. Caleb, with his mouth full of chips, muttered, "Congrats, I guess." And that was fine, because the difference was I no longer needed their approval. The first paycheck arrived a month later. Holding it in my hands felt surreal. I'd made money before, through part-time jobs, tutoring, working at cafes. But this was different. This was career money. Proof that I was stepping into a new world. Instead of blowing it, I did something deliberate. I opened a savings account in my name only. No cosigners, no access for anyone else. Every month, I funneled money into it, quietly building something of my own. Meanwhile, Caleb's games grew bigger, and my parents grew louder with their dreams for him. They talked about scholarships, about travel teams, about sending tapes to national recruiters. But I started noticing cracks. A bad game here, a minor injury there. The scouts they claimed were definitely watching never seemed to call. I didn't say anything. I just nodded when they spoke, then went back to my own work. At night, I worked on LinkedIn, joined professional groups, even signed up for an online certification course to make myself more valuable. Every step was slow, steady, deliberate, and with every new milestone, every completed project at work, every dollar saved, I felt myself pulling further away from the grip my family had on me. One Friday evening, after a long week at my new job, I sat on the balcony of my apartment with a cheap takeout dinner, watching the sun set behind the city. My phone buzzed with yet another family text about Caleb's big tournament that weekend. I muted the thread without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't aching to be included. I was content being on the outside, because the outside was where I could finally grow. But beneath the calm, a sharper thought was taking root. I wasn't just going to move on. I wasn't just going to succeed quietly. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had thrown away when they dismissed me. And deep down, I knew my rise was only the beginning of something much bigger. It was about 6 months into my new job when the first real shift happened. By then, I'd settled into a rhythm, commuting downtown, working with my team, slowly proving myself. At first, I was just another fresh graduate in a cubicle. But I put in the hours, asked the right questions, and stayed late to learn from people who'd been there for years. My manager noticed. Soon, I wasn't just doing grunt work. I was trusted with small projects, then bigger ones. And every time I succeeded, it gave me more confidence that I was finally building something for myself outside of my family's shadow. Then came the day my manager called me into his office. He was a serious man, not prone to flattery. So when he said, "Adrian, you've got a good head for this. How would you feel about training to take on client accounts?" I almost didn't believe him. Handling clients meant visibility, responsibility, and most importantly, a stepping stone to real power in the company. I agreed immediately, and that's when I started seeing just how much influence one person could have if they played their cards right. I was suddenly in meetings with executives, negotiating contracts, reviewing budgets, learning the inner workings of decisions that shaped careers. It was like being given a glimpse into a world my parents could never imagine. Around the same time, I began expanding my life outside of work. I joined a networking group for young professionals in the city, and that's where I met people my age who were also carving out their paths. Some in finance, some in law, some even in sports management. We exchanged contacts, shared advice, and built connections that stretched further than I ever thought possible. It was exhilarating. And then one night over drinks, one of those connections, a woman who worked in sports recruiting, mentioned Caleb's league. "Honestly, it's saturated right now," she said. "Tons of parents think their kids are the next big star. Unless someone is really exceptional, scouts don't even blink. The resources are limited, and most of these kids burn out before college." I sat there listening carefully, hiding the flicker of recognition that ran through me. She wasn't talking about Caleb directly, but I knew the truth. He wasn't as exceptional as my family believed. He was good, sure, but good wasn't enough in a world that chewed up and spat out kids who didn't make the cut. That was the first seed of leverage, knowledge. I didn't even need to expose it yet. Just knowing that the dream my parents were betting everything on was shaky at best, it gave me a strange, quiet sense of power. Meanwhile, at work, my account training paid off. I closed a deal with a small client, then a bigger one. By the end of the year, I was offered a raise and my own list of accounts to manage. The money wasn't astronomical, but with my savings and careful budgeting, I started to build something tangible. I even invested a portion, guided by a mentor at the firm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was positioning myself. Back home, the contrast was stark. Caleb's games became more erratic. Sometimes he was brilliant, other times sloppy. An injury benched him for a few weeks, and I overheard heated arguments between my parents about medical bills and whether the dream was still realistic. But whenever I visited, they put on the same facade, cheering him on, insisting scouts were interested, asking me to contribute here and there because family supports family. I never outright refused, but I stopped saying yes too. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and redirected the conversation. Quietly, I kept building. Quietly, I let them assume I was still the same passive Adrian who could be leaned on without question. What they didn't know was that I had begun documenting everything. Every time they asked me for money, every time Caleb used something of mine without permission, every dismissive comment, every manipulation, it all went into that same journal I'd started months earlier. I wasn't just venting anymore. I was archiving, creating a record, preparing. The pivotal moment came one Sunday when I visited the house. My dad pulled me aside and said, "You're doing well now, right? Good job. Good money. You should help your brother cover his training camp fees this summer. It's an investment in his future." I looked him in the eye and said, "I'll think about it." Inside, though, I knew my answer. Not only would I not pay, I would make sure one day they understood exactly what it meant to dismiss me. Because by then I had something I'd never had before: independence, financial stability, connections, knowledge. For the first time, I wasn't just the overlooked son. I was becoming someone they couldn't ignore forever. And as I left that night, driving back to my apartment with the city lights in the distance, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. They had built their world on Caleb, but I was quietly building mine. And when the time came, mine would overshadow theirs in ways they could never have imagined. The thing about revenge is that it's never about rushing. It's about patience. Waiting until the timing is perfect, until the pieces fall into place naturally. By the time my plan began to crystallize, nearly a year had passed since that graduation day. In that time, my career had taken off faster than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just another junior employee anymore. I was managing clients, bringing in revenue, even mentoring interns who looked at me the way I used to look at everyone else. My bank account grew steadily. My investments started compounding, and little by little, I became someone my family couldn't control. Meanwhile, Caleb's bright future was dimming. His injuries piled up, small but nagging. An ankle sprain, a pulled hamstring, nothing catastrophic, but enough to slow him down. The scouts my parents had been so sure about? They never called. The college scholarships they spoke about at every dinner? Non-existent. And yet, my family doubled down, clinging to the fantasy. They spent money on private coaches, on camps, on new gear. They borrowed from relatives. They hinted again and again that I should contribute. That was where my revenge began to take shape. I didn't refuse outright. That would have made me the enemy too soon. Instead, I started asking questions. How much are the fees? Do you think this investment makes sense if he's still injured? Have you thought about a backup plan? Each time I watched their faces tighten, watched my dad's jaw clench, watched Caleb snap at me for doubting him. I wasn't doubting him. I was planting seeds. Then came an opportunity one couldn't have scripted better if I tried. My firm partnered with a local sports association on a community sponsorship deal. It wasn't a glamorous contract, mostly funding equipment and local events, but it gave me access to conversations with people who actually worked in recruiting and talent development. And from those conversations, one truth became undeniable: Caleb wasn't even on the radar. I didn't tell my family this outright. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I set the stage. One Saturday evening, I invited them all to my apartment. It was the first time they'd seen the place since I'd really settled in. They walked in, glancing around at the clean, modern furniture, the framed diploma on the wall, the stunning view of the city skyline. My mom made a little sound of surprise. My dad tried to hide his, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on the details. Caleb flopped onto my couch like he owned it, grabbing a soda from my fridge without asking. After dinner, I casually steered the conversation. "Funny thing," I said, keeping my tone light. "I've been working with people in sports associations lately. They see a lot of players come through. It's competitive." My mom leaned forward eagerly. "Did anyone mention Caleb?" I shook my head slowly. "Not by name, but they did say something interesting. Most players who make it have backups. Education, other skills, families who support them in multiple ways." I let the words hang, watching them land. My dad frowned. "What are you trying to say?" I smiled faintly. "Just that it's risky to put everything on one dream. Sometimes it doesn't pan out no matter how much you want it to." The room went quiet for a beat, and I saw Caleb bristle, his pride visibly stung. "I'll make it," he snapped. "You'll see." I leaned back, my voice calm. "Maybe, but I've been learning something important these past months. Results speak louder than promises." That night, after they left, I set the final phase in motion. I knew my parents would come to me soon, demanding money for Caleb's next camp. And when they did, I would be ready. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, my dad called. His tone was brisk, like it was already decided. "Adrian, your brother's camp fees are due. It's an important opportunity. We need you to cover it this time." I let the silence stretch before answering. "I can't do that." He exploded instantly. "Can't or won't. You're doing well, aren't you? This is your family." I took a slow breath, letting the calm in my voice cut sharper than anger ever could. "Family supports each other, right? That's what you've always said. So tell me, Dad, where were you on my graduation day when I needed support? When I needed my family to show up?" The line went quiet. I pressed on. "You chose Caleb's game. You made it clear where your priorities were. So now I've made mine. I'm investing in my future, my career, my stability. If Caleb wants something, he can work for it, just like I did." My father sputtered, furious, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of yelling. I ended the call politely, firmly, and then I waited. Over the next few weeks, the fallout began. Relatives started whispering. Apparently, my parents had gone to them asking for money, spinning the story that I was being selfish. But the more they complained, the more people started asking why their college graduate son was thriving while their golden boy wasn't delivering results. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. And I just kept rising. Promotions, connections, a life they couldn't touch. The revenge wasn't a single explosive act. It was quieter, sharper. It was in the way I withheld what they expected. The way I let their choices catch up to them. The way my success became a mirror, forcing them to see the emptiness of the pedestal they'd built for Caleb. And I wasn't done yet because I had one last move planned. One that would turn the knife they had driven into me all those years and make them feel it themselves. The call that finally sealed everything came on a gray Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at my apartment desk reviewing a client proposal when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I considered ignoring it. I'd been doing that more often, but something told me to pick up. Her voice was strained, almost trembling. "Adrian, please. Your father doesn't want me to say this, but we're out of options. Caleb's latest injury is worse than we thought. The doctor says he might need surgery if he wants to play again. Insurance won't cover it all. We need help with the money." I closed my eyes, the words sinking in. This was it. The dream they'd sacrificed everything for, the games, the favoritism, even my graduation, was collapsing. And now they were coming to me. The sum they had called selfish, invisible, unimportant. For a moment, I thought about all the nights I'd driven Caleb around. All the times I'd been dismissed. The look on my dad's face when he'd flipped my diploma upside down. Then I spoke, steady and calm. "Mom, I can't do that. I've built my life on my own, with no help from you or Dad. You made your choice when you decided Caleb's game mattered more than my future. Now I've made mine." She was silent, just her uneven breathing on the line. Then almost a whisper. "So that's it. You'll let your family fall apart. I answered without hesitation. I didn't let anything happen. You did. And then I ended the call. The fallout came fast. Within weeks, the whispers from relatives turned into outright judgment. People who once praised my parents for raising a star athlete now questioned their choices. My grandparents, once cooing over Caleb, started asking why I had been left alone on my graduation day. Word of their favoritism spread wider than they ever expected, and soon they were on the defensive, scrambling to justify themselves to a family that no longer admired them. Caleb's surgery went ahead, but the scouts never came calling. His career ended before it began, and he grew bitter, lashing out at the very parents who had once worshipped him. My father's pride shriveled into resentment, my mother's denial into quiet shame. Their golden child was no longer golden. And with every success I stacked, another promotion, another milestone, another step into the life I had built, they felt the distance grow. Months later, I ran into an old family friend at a cafe. They leaned across the table, lowering their voice as if sharing a secret. Your parents regret what they did. You know, everyone knows how they treated you. Now they sit alone at Caleb's empty games, talking about what could have been. But everyone else? They talk about you, the son who made it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, because by then I didn't need their approval. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was living a life so far above the one they had tried to confine me to that their neglect became their punishment. On the anniversary of my graduation, I went out to dinner by myself. I ordered the best meal on the menu, raised a quiet toast to the diploma that hung proudly on my wall, and felt the weight of the past lift just a little. As I set the glass down, I thought of that moment on stage, holding my diploma with no one cheering for me. Back then, it had felt like the loneliest moment of my life. Now, I realized it had been the beginning of everything. And with that, I whispered to myself, I don't need them. I never did. Then I walked out into the night, leaving their world behind for good.